Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, the series where I plan on reviewing every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And today we are looking at Solange's 2016 album, A Seat at the Table. A Seat at the Table was released underneath the Sate Records and Columbia label with various producers and art direction from Carlota Guerrero. Nationality USA, and a running time of 51 minutes and 43 seconds. Now, going into this album, I was unaware of who Solange even really was, and I didn't even know she was Beyonce's younger sister. That left me up to a much more open and unbiased opinion of this album going into it. And I have to say that after hearing this entire album straight through front to back, I'm far more impressed with what Solange is capable of than what I've heard from Beyonce, period. Because throughout this entire album, Solange handles so many heavy topics so fluidly and so easily that managed to overtake the listener and really just throw people into these very politically heavy topics while at the same time delivering it in a very enjoyable, smooth, and irresistible way. Right from the get-go, you have the song Rise. Is this really powerful, uplifting, and self-love centered song, and managed to empower the listener with her extremely infectious voice and just amazing instrumentals and production here. It is so crisp and clean and just smooth to the ear that really just draws you in instantly. It's a fairly short track, but throws you into this world that is going to be carried throughout this entire album. With the second track, Wary, you have Solange kind of advising the listener to be more wary of their surroundings, to be more aware of the political surroundings that they have themselves constantly thrown into. You as a person should be aware of who you are in society and the amount of privilege you might have and the amount of lack of privilege that others may have based on their gender, race, or social class. Solange's voice manages to soar above this amazing and crisp, clean production and just sounds so angelic and just powerful. So raw and visceral, which is how smooth she's able to make her voice sound. With the fourth song, Cranes in the Sky, you have Solange continuing to tackle these same heavy political issues, but this time she's talking about how people choose not to be wary and instead completely avoid and push these problems aside through their own vices. Whether that be through drugs, alcohol, sex, or excessive amounts of work, to really push these problems aside and pretend as if they don't exist, which only continues to further these issues in the world and continues to make them far worse than they already are. But I think Solange's way of bringing awareness to the fact that people are doing this on a regular basis is a really great way to pull the listener in and say, hey, you need to wake up and be a little bit more aware of who you are and what you are doing. And this metaphor she uses, cranes in the sky, is alluding to construction cranes and how these very massive and ugly things are constantly there, yet we choose to ignore them in everyday life. I really enjoy the chorus of the song because Solange really paints a picture quite vividly with these cranes, and on top of that there are these backup vocals that add more texture and depth to an already highly textured and well-produced track. And then of course there is the sixth track on here, Mad, featuring Lil Wayne, which surprisingly is one of the few songs I have ever heard where Lil Wayne doesn't ruin it. I am not a huge Lil Wayne fan. In fact, I think most of the songs he is on kind of get damaged purely because of his own issues and style that he emits constantly. But this time around, I think he blends so well with Solange, and I think her production and her instrumentals really complement Lil Wayne's sort of raspy voice that he normally does. And even his cheesy and corny lines are dialed back quite a bit more than typical for Lil Wayne, which makes the song much more bearable than it would have normally been with your regular Lil Wayne fare. And throughout this track, Lil Wayne speaks of issues in the world that he faces and why he is so mad at the world for the same reasons that Solange would be mad at the world, mostly due to the color of their skin. And I think he is just as effective at getting this point across as Solange is throughout this album, and I think he adds a lot more depth to the track than I would have previously expected. There's also the song Don't You Wait, where she is this time saying to the critics directly, don't you wait for me to stop being political and to fit into this box that you so badly want me to fit into. Because she's claiming that at this point in her career, critics constantly paint her into a certain light or want her to behave and act in a certain way based off of her race or sexuality. But she is saying, you're not going to get that from me, so don't hold your breath, don't wait up for it. And honestly, she does this in such a raw and powerful way, just as she does much of this album, and the production here is some of the best production so far I've heard on an already nearly flawless produced album. It has this underlying piano with these punchy and heavy synths that adds so much texture to this track, and on top of that, it is a much more groovy and funky track than most of the songs on here, going a little bit away from the R&B style and more to the funk zone. And this is a much welcome addition to the track list, as it is so full of energy and just oomph that I really, really enjoy it and love the message here. I haven't spoken too much about the skits on this album, as skits are typically something I don't address when I'm reviewing an album because they don't always have to add too much to them. But on this album, I gotta say the skits are through and through fantastic, and they complement every single track both before and after them, really fitting in like this greater puzzle piece, creating this massive mural of sorts in this album. And if there is one skit that I specifically want to speak about on this album, it's the skit Tina Taught Me, which is where Solange and Beyonce's mother, Tina Knowles, here speaks about racism and how she has dealt with it throughout her life, and how people of the black community are being constantly pushed down and being seen as racist or anti-white by being proud of who they are, when in actuality there's nothing wrong with being proud of your race, and it should be something that you are fully embracing. But instead, throughout Tina's life, throughout Solange, throughout Beyonce's life, they have constantly dealt with this very blatant racism and treat it as if they're not allowed to be proud of who they are. There's nothing wrong with being pro-black, and it is not anti-white, just as Tina so vividly paints here. And I really think it's just such a beautiful and authentic moment to hear on this album, and really drives the point home of the themes. There's also the 11th track, Where Do We Go?, which I really love the Benny and the Jets sample that is used in here. I can't say a single bad thing about this song. Once again, it is just completely and utterly flawless. The Benny and the Jets sample that is used is just so well implemented that at first I wasn't fully catching on to the fact that it was a sample until I looked deeper into it. And honestly, it's just so blended well into Solange's own style and unique take of it that it is just truly breathtaking and a great way to rework such a classic masterpiece. Weaker artists would take this sample and just completely butcher it or make it so blatantly obvious that it is completely ruining such a classic, but Solange manages to mix it in with just complete ease. The use of features on this album are also expertly done, with Q-Tip making multiple appearances in the skits and also appearing in the track Borderline. And you also have the continually amazing and infamous Andre 3000 on the track Junie, who in my opinion is one of the best artists of the 2000s and just turns everything he touches into gold. And throughout 2016, Andre 3000 was featured on many fantastic albums, this one included. His addition to the chorus here is very subtle, simple, but again, very Andre 3000, and his voice just moves and works so well with the Solange production. I think what I love about the features that he did throughout 2016 is that they never overtook the star of the tracks, and instead were very subtle. And that is exactly the case with Junie, as Solange is still truly the star here, and her vocals and everything she contributes is just so beautiful and raw, but Andre 3000 manages to just slightly lift this up for her. And again, making this such a fantastic track. And then the final song here, Scales, which comes in just before the very last skit, is just such a fantastic and great way to close out this album, this time taking a much more spacey approach as she speaks about self-love once more and self-empowerment, and talking about how you shouldn't let others tear you down based on your race, sexuality, gender, or even your social class. These are all very much a part of who you are, and you should embrace every aspect of yourself while you can, instead of letting others continually knock you down for these things, because if you do, you're never really going to pick yourself back up and truly love life and truly love who you are. And I think that message that is carried so vividly throughout this entire album, and especially in this track, is part of the reason why this album is just such a clear-cut masterpiece for Solange, and is definitely worthy of continual praise. And then she finally closes out this album, this 21-track album, with the skit The Chosen Ones, which is reverting back to racism and reverting back to race, and saying that, yes, you may have taken us and brought us here, but we are truly going to rise up and show you that we are the chosen ones through art and through our artistic vision and through just all the things we bring to this world, that at the end of the day, you can try to knock us down, but we are still going to rise. And honestly, that reverts right back into the opening of this album and is just a perfect way to wrap this entire thing. To say that the oppressed will rise is just such an amazing statement to end this album off, and it is, in my opinion, another reason why this album is just continually so great. So without further ado, the soft rating of this album for me came to a 9.5 out of 10, and I will harden that up to a 10 out of 10. It is a perfect album in my eyes, with only a couple of tracks being slightly weaker than the others. And of course, with this amount of praise and love and how important this album, I think, is for the 2010s, especially for the amount of statement and political issues it is driving home, it is definitely an essential listen. It is a time capsule of sorts and will remain such an important album for decades to come. So, of course, E for essential, give this one a listen. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this review. Let's go ahead and see what the next album you'll listen to is in the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. Random number generator 1 to 1001, generate 916, which is 916 being the album Since I Left You by The Avalanches. So give that a listen, and I will review that in exactly 1 week from now. Anyways, if you like this video, please hit like and subscribe if you want to follow along and listening to every album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And as always, my name is Randy Joe, and I am signing off.